Hello and welcome to the Autism 360 podcast, the 360 Method, a weekly podcast where we talk about everything Autism 360. Each week, we're going to be catching you up with what's going on in the program, chatting with team members, and talking all things mindset whilst exploring ideas relevant to autism parenting. I'm your host, Ella Bailey. I'm an Autism 360 veteran coach, although to be fair, not as veteran as my guest today. I come from a psychology background, and today I am joined by the delightful and ravishing Stacy Badon. Hello, Stacy.
Hi, how are you? It's good to be here.
It's so lovely to have you, and welcome to our lovely listeners. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I really want to extend our thoughts to you. We care about you and your experience of listening to this podcast. We want to hear from you so that we can talk about things that you care about. So please do drop us a line at hello@autism360.com. And I'm sure that you'll have lots of awesome questions to ask Stacy after she's given us her wisdom today. So before we get started, I will just acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land I live and work, and from where this podcast is being recorded today. And I also just want to mention that this podcast does not substitute for medical advice. Very important. And if you are concerned about your child or concerned about yourself or want more information, please do get in contact with your healthcare professional or contact us at Autism 360. We'd love to help you. Mm-hmm. So, Stacy, today we are chatting about sensory stuff, your favorite.
I know. I tend to have lots of favorites, but everything sort of goes to sensory. And, we often, in the program, parents get to sign up for a sensory session if it's necessary. And of course, I think it's super important. We have lots of coaches who are very aware of the sensory system and strategies that can be implemented, but some parents need a little bit more sort of digging underneath to really sort of get to the nitty-gritty of what's going on. And I think that one of the reasons I like that we have that option for parents is because we all are navigating based on our sensory input. When I say input, I mean the information our brain gets, right? Like right now, I have the fan on because it's very warm today. If I were to get chilly because of the fan, then I, as an adult, would probably excuse myself and either turn the fan down or I would put on a jacket. However, our kiddos respond to things by either going to turn the lights off because it's overload, or going to get their jacket because they may not have the immediate communication skill to say I'm cold, or maybe they don't have the language to say I'm cold. And so they will respond to their environment to meet their sensory needs. But a lot of times the adults are not always understanding why. And so it's looked at as non-compliance or not following directions or not attending to a task. And it's really, I cannot process anything you're saying in this classroom or this therapy session because I am not regulated, or my sensory system needs my attention. So it's important for parents to understand that sensory component because everyone responds differently to the sensory system, or should I say the environmental sensory stimulus that we get. And, I was just sharing with a parent, Ella, the other day, because I don't know if you've noticed on social media, the whole terminology of neurodiversity, and now everyone's, claiming to be neurodivergent. And, before no one wanted fidgets, and then we had spinners, and now everybody needs a fidget, right? So now those folks who really needed those accommodations are kind of being disregarded in terms of their sensory system, because now they just think, oh, it's like everyone else, right? And it's not. So what I try to help parents understand is, for those of us who have a pretty efficient, and I don't want to say that the sensory system for autistic individuals is disordered or not efficient. It's just different, right? It takes on a lot, it processes it very differently. And, a lot of autistic individuals just say they pick up so much, right? The flickering lights that I may not see, or that hint of the fan in the background, that pitch that, I can just filter out. And it's hard for them to process. And so, kids respond with either fight or flight. But I think the difference is that, for me, if I am in a training and I am in a room that is very cold and I am moving my arms up and down in order to stay warm, yes, I am uncomfortable. Yes, I am tolerating that sensory, uncomfortable input of a cold temperature, but I'm not going to go into a meltdown mode. And that's the difference between autistic individuals needing that sensory safe and that fight or flight or sensory seeking, because if I don't get that regulation, I could go into meltdown, and I don't want to go into meltdown crisis, right? It's not fun for anyone. So I think I try to help, parents understand that it's different. Yes, we can maybe tolerate the vacuum cleaner or the person outside who's cutting the grass, but we will not have a system that shuts down or goes into meltdown mode. And so our kiddos are really just trying to
navigate the environment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, I just need to be sensory safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've really been increasing the neurodiverse voices that I've been taking on lately in, my media intake and that sort of thing. And something that has really come to light for me recently around kind of sensory regulation, and I'm always looking for, to do better, to improve, and those sorts of things, is that there's such a social element in which forms of regulation are acceptable and which ones aren't, so it's totally normal, I guess, quote unquote normal, for a person to be sitting jiggling their leg at a cafe, or for a person to be twiddling on the side of their notes, or for a person to be twirling their hair, right? And they're all, or potentially, regulatory strategies that those people are using to bring themselves back down to baseline. But that's totally socially acceptable. Nobody is policing their behavior. Nobody is telling them to stop because it's weird. But then when we get a beautiful hand flapper or somebody who's really digging the input of walking on their toes, all of a sudden that for some crosses some imaginary line that we're therefore meant to stop them doing. And that was something that was just totally, it seems, really clear now that I know, but, I didn't know before, kind of thing. Or, I just hadn't worked it out for myself, sort of thing. But I guess to get us kind of wound back a little bit, parents, they have a lot of, I guess, competing things, especially if they're newly on this autistic parenting journey. What are some really basic building block pieces of information that you would love all parents of autistic kids to have around the sensory world?
I think that, because, it's very complex, right? It's very multi-layered. It's not very simple. What works on Monday, they may not need on Tuesday. So there's no program. I mean, even a sensory diet is not something that you have to follow rigidly, because their needs are different in different environments and different days. So I think the things that I really am trying to help parents understand, and I want parents to understand, is that if you understand your child's sensory needs and you provide them as sensory safe an environment as possible throughout their day, there's some things, of course, we know we don't have control over, but we can prepare for that as well. But I think it's important for parents to know that the sensory regulation is the foundation for communication, attention to task, and emotional regulation. If your sensory needs are not met, it's really hard to communicate when you have to attend to your sensory system because you're dysregulated. If you are dysregulated and you need sort of that vestibular proprioceptive input, and you're seeking it by running around the classroom, you're not able to attend to the math lesson in the way the teacher would like. Now, lots of kids can move their bodies in the classroom and learn much better than sitting still. But that's something that, we're trying to get educators to buy into. Some do, and it's fantastic for the students, and some just, it's really hard for them to sort of let go of that control of everyone sitting like little robots in the classroom. And when it comes to the emotional regulation, and I know I've talked about this a lot in our trainings, I just need parents to give their kids a little grace, because emotional regulation is a very high level skill for adults. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are adults that are still working on emotional regulation. And I think it's a matter of what's happening is, instead of trying to control the emotional regulation, to understand how they can sort of process those emotions and respond in a way that we have deemed to be more appropriate. Now, when I say more appropriate, I do not think it's acceptable to throw chairs. We don't want to throw chairs when we're angry. Yes, sometimes we feel like throwing a chair. Yes, sometimes we feel like hitting someone because we're so angry, but that is not something that we condone as people. We try to not do that.
Not on.
But it doesn't mean that the instinct to want to yell or scream is not there. So how do we do that in a way that is a little bit healthier or a little bit more understood, so that the person who is with the child when they're sort of having these struggles, and I think it's understanding the sensory regulation in terms of, if you're regulated, you can respond a little bit calmer, which is not my favorite word, but it's a word that everyone can understand. And, I'll give a really good example. The other day in a session, I was trying to help, I always tell stories, and trying to help the parents understand and relate, because it's hard to relate to something that you don't have to experience. It's very hard. Absolutely. And so I said to the parents, I said, remember when you had that newborn baby and you didn't sleep and you're exhausted, and then you're really short with your partner and you're really just irritated? That's what dysregulation feels like for a lot of autistic individuals, 24/7, every day of their lives, right? So remember what that felt like, that you didn't really want to scream and yell at your partner, but you're tired. And so your quick impulsive response is, I'm agitated, because you are agitated because you haven't slept. When you don't sleep, you're tired. So I think those are the things that I really would love for parents to understand, in terms of just that basic foundation, that the sensory regulation impacts communication, attention, and emotional regulation. And so we need to support their sensory needs. And of course, the big picture is understanding your kiddos' sensory needs and understanding that it's going to change as they grow, like everything else changes as they grow. Our kids are not the same at 3 as they are at 10 or 12 or 15 or 17. So it's hard for us to remember that, because, when they're so little, you don't think about them growing up, but they do. They grow up. So that's my, in a nutshell, quick response.
Amazing. I often have found a lot of things that parents are telling me about what makes it difficult for them to keep their cool when their kiddo is melting down, is their own response to the auditory sensory stimuli of their kiddo melting down. And so that is the example that I use when I'm trying to get a parent to be able to connect with their child's experience of being sensory dysregulated. So I sort of will say to them, that feeling that you get when kiddo is melting down and they may be making lots of loud noises, or there's lots of movement, and you feel this sort of rise of tension and panic. that is the experience of a sensory discomfort that your child is experiencing, but that's all the time. And do you often find that parents have or maybe discovering their own sensory needs when you start explaining these things to them in the program? Can you touch a little on that?
I do. And, I have parents and you and I have talked about this, wear earplugs. If your kid needs to verbally stim while they do their homework, you just have to accommodate yourself and wear earplugs. If it really does bother you, you can designate areas for them to spin. You can visually communicate boundaries of where they can jump. That's what we do in the classroom. I had a jumping lane that was marked in blue tape. I had a place where you could go and do those things that may have bothered the other children who have their own sensory, sort of regulation. So it's, when there's more than one kid, which many of our families do have more than one kiddo, you really have to, do a lot of planning and a lot of proactive strategies. And I think that for a lot of families, because parenting is so different now, where children are literally their children are never in another room. I mean, it used to be your kids went outside and they played and you were fine. And now every minute besides school and work, everyone's in everyone's space. And so families have to decide how they're going to navigate that themselves as a parent, know when they can tap out if they have someone else who is parenting with them, or if they have a support system. But the other, reality is that parenting is hard work, and we don't know what life is going to bring us when we have a baby or adopt a baby, get pregnant, however we become parents. And I think that a lot of the struggles that parents have is their expectations of what parenting is nothing that they thought it was going to be, right? Especially with social media of people showing their cute pictures. I'm like, those cute pictures of a toddler, it's like 5 minutes of your day, right? Like, toddlers are exhausting. They're wonderful. They're fun, but they're a lot of work, right? You can't do much when you're parenting a toddler except make sure that they're safe, because they're on the go. They're on the go, and that's just toddlers. And that's a good thing. We want toddlers to explore. So I think for parents, it's recognizing, giving themselves grace, and recognizing what they can tolerate and what they cannot tolerate, and how are they going to navigate that as a parent. Does that mean you need to get mindset coaching? Do you need to get your own therapy? Do you need to figure out if you need to pick your child up later or go out for a run before you come in? There's so many different things that we have to recognize within ourselves as parents in order to be the very best parent that we want to be. And everyone chooses to parent in a way that either culturally they've been taught, or they decide on their own, or they read a book or whatever it is. But I think that it's knowing yourself. And that's a big task. That's like emotional regulation, right? And I think that a lot of families are families and parenting because that's just what we're supposed to do, not necessarily what I wanted to do, or I thought it was going to be cute. I remember this wonderful mother. She was just, she really wanted to be this calm, nurturing, not yell at her children mom. And finally she said, I never wanted children. I just wanted 2 cats. Yeah. Okay. So when you hear that, it's like, okay, well, we now have 2 children. So we've got to figure out what to do. And one of your children has been diagnosed with autism. And so that's another layer. And so I think there's so many dynamics into parenting that some of us don't even realize when we become parents. And some people are very conscious about their parenting. So I think it's just figuring out what your tolerance level is for certain things, and then coming up with a proactive strategy to get through the day so that your child can get through the day. Because the reality is our children are relying on the adults to support them, whether that's to be the calm in the storm, whether that's to be to understand their communication nuances, or supply them with sensory regulation activities. They're relying heavily on the adults in the room. And children are very instinctive, and that's why they will go into a classroom and walk out. They're like, oh, feeling this lady's not really sure she's going to be able to support me, or not having a really good rapport with a therapist. It's like, oh, she's not really supporting me, so I'm going to go over here because not feeling safe, whether it's sensory safe or just not wanting to have a meltdown safe, right? I need someone to sort of be that person that I can rely on. And it's a lot, I tell parents all the time, parenting is hard work 24/7. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of proactive strategies when you're parenting an autistic child. And that's the reality of it. And so we come up with a plan on how to implement that. And I'm very much proactive planner. I prefer not to have to be reactive and not to have to worry about a meltdown. But I think also part of the coping for parents is you have to just expect today we might have a meltdown. And if you expect today we might have a meltdown, and if you don't, yay, all the proactive strategies worked. And if we do, oh, it's okay. I've got my strategies ready for that, right? I already know what I'm going to do. Because sometimes life happens. So I think it's the same with teachers. Teachers will, go into a big tizzy. For 6 weeks, they haven't had a meltdown. I'm like, so we had one today. Whoa, it's a new day, right? Day, new minute. Because sometimes it happens.
I've had learned so much, from you in our professional relationship, in the program, and this whole sensory world that is such an epic tool that I wanted to share a story for our listeners about one of the sensory wins that I had with one of my beautiful clients here on the program. Mum was really concerned that kiddo wasn't bathing. We couldn't get kiddo to wash. Mum was really struggling, having real concerns about hygiene and cleanliness and whatever. And so I really probed. I sort of tried to understand what the situation of bathing was. And it turned out that kiddo would wash at grandparents' house, but wouldn't wash at home. Kiddo would jump in a pool, but wouldn't wash at home. Kiddo would all sorts of other things, but washing at home was an issue. Anyway, so I sort of probed a little deeper, asking Mum, okay, so what is the washing situation? Anyway, it turned out they only had a shower, have a bath. And so I sort of was like, okay, well, I can see what's going on here. What does kiddo do when they feel the water falling on their skin in any situation, a sprinkler, a water, rain, exactly. Kiddo freaks out, cannot cope. And what we ended up doing was getting one of those pop-up bathtubs from, I think it was Bunnings or something, setting that up in the bottom of the shower. Problem solved. Kiddo is bathing. And I think just having that tiny bit of sensory understanding, and now kiddo can clean themselves in a way that feels safe for them. Mum isn't concerned about hygiene, and we're not getting the whole family totally dysregulated in the evening, trying to get them into a shower that feels totally whack for the kid.
Exactly. And so you guys created a sensory safe environment for bath time. And that's a really great example because it's very common. And this is where I guess, if I have to say closing final words, part of parenting an autistic child and understanding their sensory needs is you have to recognize it's not going to be the same as yours. It's really not going to be the same as yours. And so just because you enjoy a shower doesn't mean that your child can tolerate a shower or process a shower. It's not really tolerating it. And so, and vice versa, bath time. And so I think it's, our role as coaches is to help parents see they've got to look outside of their needs and what they think works for them, because it's not always the same. And what's really funny is if you look at any situation where there's a two-parent home, or even it can be just multiple adults, multi-generational families, everybody has a different. Some people like to shower in the morning. Some people like to shower at night. Some people love to take a bath at night. Some people don't like to take a bubble bath. If you ever watch those television shows where the couples are looking for the new house, one of the persons is like, no, we have to have a big bathtub because I like taking a bath. The other person does not enjoy a bath. And so I think it's remembering that as human beings, we all have different things that help us feel organized and different music that helps us feel organized. And we have to remember even food, everybody doesn't like the same food. You can go to a restaurant and there are reviews for that restaurant that you love. And several people don't like the food at the restaurant because everybody's sensory system is different. Yeah. But the difference between, remember, our kiddos is it's a difference between crisis and being able to navigate the environment or not. That's really the huge difference that I think is important for our listeners to understand, that just because we're saying, yes, they're human beings and we're all different in regards to sensory, it is a very different experience for the autistic individual, and it is very serious. So we don't want to make people sit in an environment or listen to sounds that they're screaming. The birthday party is the one that I think is my biggest pet peeve. I'm just like, why is everyone singing? It's his birthday. Everyone's singing happy birthday and the child is screaming while covering their ears. Yeah. Why? Why are we doing that? Why is the birthday about all of the people around him and not about the child? There was a wonderful graduation where an autistic gentleman graduated. I can't remember if it was college. I think it was high school. And no one during the ceremony made clapping noises or screaming because they knew it was going to be a sensory trigger. And that's where we want to get, so that we all understand that sometimes we just have to do a little bit of adjustments so that our kiddos and autistic adults can navigate the environment. And when they navigate the environment and they can communicate and attend in a way that works for them, then they're able to contribute to society. And that's a benefit to all of us. And that's why I talk about this all the time.
What we do, absolutely. Yes. So just before we go, I would love to ask, one of the parents from the program has sent in this question. This question is from Zainab from Brisbane. She asks, I go into total panic mode when my son starts screaming in the supermarket. My OT says this is a sensory thing, but when I'm panicking, I don't know how to help him. Do you have any tips? Oh, this is perfect, Stacy question.
It's very, very common. And it's also, I will say, it's frustrating for me when parents are told by a therapist, oh, it's sensory based, but then they don't tell them what.
Yes.
Okay, what do I do?
I need more than that. Yes.
Exactly. So my first line of defense is, don't bring them to the grocery store if you don't have to. Try to grocery shop when you are not with your child. That's where that proactive planning comes into play, where you work it out with either your support worker or your partner, and try to do as much grocery shopping while your child is developing some sensory regulation strategies, especially when they're little. It's really, really a lot. The grocery store is a lot. And, adults forget that they actually choose to go to the grocery store either when it's crowded, or some people get up early when it's not because they don't like the hustle and bustle. The other part is, if you do have to go, then if you have an understanding of what the triggers are, come with everything ready, right? Whether that's the time to use technology, iPad, headphones, they can block everything out and just put them in the cart and go, right? Get your things. Sometimes with older kids, you can get them involved in the checklist of the grocery store, but it's really a matter of either avoid the scenario if you can, because you don't have control over the grocery store. You just don't. you don't have control over the grocery store. I was in the store earlier and there was a dog barking. I mean, I'm just like, okay, so how is this working for some people in the store? It wasn't a pet store. It's a hardware store. And so if you can, but I know sometimes we have to bring our children with us to the store. So try to keep it short and simple, but just get that backpack. If you have to go, if it's part of your routine, if you are the primary caregiver and you're in charge of errands and you have your kiddos, then do as much sensory regulation, 90 minutes to 2 hours before you go to the grocery store. Just like sleep. If you sleep well, you wake up ready for the day. If you regulate before you go out into a very overstimulating environment, it's easier for the child to process, but also have the backup stuff that you know works for your kiddo. So prepare, be proactive, avoid the store if you can, but prepare and be proactive. Like that is just, and that's where understanding, right? You know, getting input from your child's therapist or with the Autism 360 program from your coach to try to figure out what that looks like for your kiddo. Because it's different for every kiddo. Yeah. Every kiddo's different. Earphones work for some kids and some kids, it's not a solution.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
yay.
That's my answer.
Thank you. Zainab, please do get in touch. Let us know if that's been helpful. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining me, Stacey. I always, as you know, appreciate your wisdom. And thank you to our lovely listeners. We will be back next week with a parent story from a parent on the Autism 360 program. I know, it's very exciting. I can't wait to share it with everybody. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you then. Bye.
All right.